Welcome to the Inspired Evolution, and it is definitely a treat to be here today with Jon Yeo. Jon, how are you?
Hi, good, thank you. Good, thanks.
It's really a pleasure to have you here. For those that are tuning in to Jon for the first time, Jon is an executive coach. He helps leaders share strategic messages in meaningful ways. He's known for his ability to articulate complex things very simply. And if you go looking around on YouTube and finding some videos around Jon, you will notice this to be very true. He works with CEOs and senior leadership teams to build trust, empathy, and engagement in what is, I guess the only real way to put it is it's an increasingly distracted world that we live in these days. Technology maybe have some parts to do that. I know we had a chat around this recently. But yeah, that's the work that he's doing. He works with many well-known national and international brands, and he's currently developing his own training into a core curriculum for University MBA programs. He's the past president, just recently, of Professional Speakers Australia, and he's a current licensee of TEDx Melbourne. And in his spare time, just because he can shoot the shit on stuff, he works with youth and youth at risk and diversity and inclusion programs of major international organizations. Jon, I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it is to have you here today.
Awesome. Glad I could make it. We finally made this work.
The stars have aligned. We've been trying to get this to happen for a little bit, but I completely trust in the flow of everything. So really a blessing to be here. And I think the key thing that stands out to me and those that are connected to you in the community, is just, there's so much that you are doing in the space of speaking. And I know like you've offered courses in the past in terms of helping people empower themselves to find their voice. And obviously that's a big part of your corporate offering is helping people find their voice. And knowing you a little bit, your voice is not just your voice and your verbal communication. It's actually your walk in life, because storytelling is a big part of your message as well. I think where I wanted to start was sort of go back into how did this become a thing for you?
Wow. It depends how far you wanted to go back, because
up to you.
So I'm an introvert. So by nature, I'm actually a very quiet, quite reserved type person. And at the time, I guess we're going back. I was in charge of major Y2K projects, and so engineers didn't really get a lot of time in front of CEOs. So how did I overcome my ability not only to speak to someone who's important, but also get them to understand the criticality of what's going on? And so I got really good at these 90-second corridor conversations, and I kind of developed little processes around that.
Yeah.
And given that people need to sort of hear things in sound bites, make an impact, and do it in short periods of time, I developed this little practice around that. So that when I joined TED and ran TEDx Melbourne, it became a critical part of the way I communicate and the way I help people communicate.
I find that amazing. So because TED is fundamentally, for those tuning in for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about TED as the overall organization and where TEDx sits with that? And obviously these talks are designed to be exactly what you've shared, short and impactful.
Yeah. So TED began in the mid-'80s around a concept called ideas worth spreading. And originally it was really around three particular domains: technology, entertainment, and design, and their convergence. Right. At the time, they hadn't converged. Since then, obviously that convergence has happened. It's broadened its scope to be all sorts of things, anything who's doing something remarkable in their area of expertise. So you've got, philanthropists, business people, people like Dalai Lama and Al Gore, people who've kind of got some sort of place and statement that they want to share, but also people doing remarkable things. So you have these very young people no one had ever heard of that come up with these great ideas. And so it's really a platform for exploring what the potential future of where we are in and what that world could potentially look like. And so in about 2005, the TEDx community was created, which is really a way for the TED community to extend beyond the standard conference, which was once a year at the time.
Right.
How do we have it year round? How do we have it local? How do we engage people in places that don't physically come to California, where it was physically being recorded at the time?
Yeah.
It's since moved. But, and so TEDx then became, I guess, a broadening of that platform for local organizers to do local based things, but with a global impact.
Yeah, right. That's amazing. And so I've heard you say that if there's one thing you do in life, it's you've got to see if you can qualify and get along to a TED event.
Yeah, totally. I think, I mean, not just my event, I think everyone in that community is very future focused, very optimistic, and very solution oriented. And so the attitudes and values and conversations of that community is extremely almost say addictive. You know, like it's kind of like, wow, this is possible. This is, people believe in me. People think that this is possible, you know, that these are the ways that we could potentially make it if we choose. And so it became a great positive reinforcer of not only of your ideas, but also great challenges to your assumptions and values in a positive way, that they genuinely want to explore how their world and your world intersect, and whether and there is a genuine interest in helping each other. And so there's this really strong sense of community about how do we support each other through these grand visions that we all hold.
Which I find is something that was really poignantly dropped in for me when I finally got to connect with you in person last week. We were sitting there, was ambassadors from yourself from TEDx Melbourne, ambassadors from TEDx in Singapore, TEDx in Hong Kong. And, you know, you see the TED content, and we used to joke about this when we were in high school, early university. And it was like, you know, I watch a TED talk and I feel like I don't need to go to uni for the day. You know, there was like this person explaining like mathematical models and how everything is interconnected in networks. And you're like, whoa, like I don't need calculus for today. Like that was enough. You know? So there's this amazing content, which is really supportive, and it was never really it never really dawned on me that there's a community that's really building. Obviously you see the views and the listeners and the following on the internet, but I never really understood the community aspect to it, which now being exposed to you and having these conversations together, I'm in awe of it.
Yeah, look, it's the primary reason I continue to stay involved. I mean, there's lots of crazy things and there's lots of amazing things out there to do that I could be distracted by, but this community and the conversation we have is amazingly satisfying and thought and growth expanding at the same time.
So being surrounded by thought leaders, I think it's a really interesting space, because you just mentioned that TED started in the 80s.
Yeah. The mid-80s, 84, I think it was.
Never heard of it until, I guess, I started watching videos on YouTube. Was that always was YouTube responsible for a big part of things, or what's going on with TED and that strategy?
That's a great question. So TED, the website itself, TED.com, came out in 2005. It was the same year that YouTube started. So Chris Anderson himself has even said that, you know, if YouTube didn't become a thing, TED might not have become a thing, because they had all this content, but they had no platform to share it with. And as a not-for-profit, it's not as if they can just go buy bandwidth and allow everyone to watch this stuff for free. Back then, video streaming was very expensive and very complicated. And so they didn't have the capacity to do that. But suddenly there was a site where you could share stuff and people could share amongst that community. It became a remarkable thing.
I do think it's fascinating that they went there, because membership to come along to some of these events is, we're talking in excess of $10,000 to just be there. Some people are paying way more than even that, just because they believe in what's happening in this space. And then they've open sourced this content that people are spending such a large sum of money to obviously meet the people in the space, but obviously to be exposed to this information. And they've just, the forward thinkingness of TED.
Look, I think that was radical at the time. And a lot of people said you shouldn't be giving away your IP. You know, those were the days where your IP was your sacred cow, you know. And so that was a radical thing. And they got a lot of pushback by both the community and internally in the organization, that why are we giving away the very thing that people pay tens of thousands of dollars to come see? And so in some respects, it was a bold move. And I think TED as an innovation brand kind of reinvented not only online video, but short talk formats, experience design, collaboration and intersection of different disciplines and areas of expertise in a way that no one else was doing. And I think that cross-breeding of ideas and values and attitudes really became the impetus by which TED became successful as a community. That's why the TED community, I would argue, is almost more valuable than the videos. Well, I reckon it is. I reckon it is more valuable than you can watch videos of anything anywhere now, right? Of any topic. but it's still out front. It's still leading the way from that point of view.
I love that. And one of the things that I'm going to try and use this conversation that we've had to sort of channel into is, we've talked about change, we've talked about innovation, we've talked about keeping things concise and like impactful and short. And obviously you do a lot of work with brands, right? And so there's aligning yourself and your values. My own self as a case study is, Amrit, the Inspired Evolution, values unity, transformation, aligns with a brand such as Mindvalley, and dropping into that and understanding that actually these guys have done a lot of work in this space prior to me, and it's really easy to embed myself in this ecosystem as an individual because my values line up with the values of, this wider ecosystem. And it seems like it's, what a great ambassador for TED Melbourne you would be, being the individual that you are. Like, has that always been a conscious sort of step that you've taken, or was that something that's evolved over time, having realized, walked a path, and then sort of gone, actually, this is where we align? And can you tell us more about that?
That was the only reason I continue to stay with the organization in that respect, because there's a lot of organizations that, I'm not going to say they've sold out, but it's easier to sell out and kind of go where the exciting thing is happening, or go where, the bigger community is, or go here because you can make more money as an operation. We've never taken that path. It was just part of the DNA of the organization and DNA of the origins of this concept for me. And I think that's the heart and value that continues to hold true even, 10 years down the track. TEDx Melbourne started in 2009, which is when all the other TEDx licenses became a thing. And so I still estimate that we're probably the first TEDx in Australia at the time.
Nice.
And so it was really the origin of the impetus of that community that then became the basis by which the conversation grew. I believe that's the reason why that TED brand still prevails.
And so, being an introvert, has the conversations in and around TED helped you have better conversations, grown into the speaker that you are?
It certainly evolved in a sense that I had to be more precise and more quantifiable for the logic-based people about how we might go about being effective as communicators, whether it's on stage or off stage.
Right.
It's definitely refined it from that point of view. But in terms of my own development, for me, it was kind of my own journey. In between there, part that I didn't mention sort of just before that, that Y2K project was I was a radio DJ for our student radio at university.
Yeah.
And because I wasn't exposed, but I could still voice my opinion, it became my platform for discovering my own voice and my own identity in my own place. So that, I think, discovery process was part of the early journey, even pre what I discussed at the very beginning of the webinar.
I love that. So there's these little bits, and I think that's really key because watching your TEDx talk from Launceston, you talk about the ripple effects that these little moments, these little things can really have. Should you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you want to watch the video, which still makes me cringe. Of that. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
We're always our own harshest critics, John.
I would do it very differently now. But, that I think everyone says that when they release something to the world, And I kind of took solace in Reid Hoffman's comment that is, if you're not embarrassed by your first launch, then you launch too late. But I only adopted that sort of narrative when I recently heard that and justified that. Previously, that was kind of a little bit anxious. But Small Things was really something of my upbringing in that my father was always about, don't forget, these people, they're struggling. They're always looking for opportunities, and all it needs is these little things to make, give them a chance. These small things can make a big difference. It's primarily why I do a lot of youth work in Asia, because the Australian dollar here is worth $1, but an Australian dollar in, say, China is worth way more.
Yeah.
And so that was part of kind of my combination of upbringing and value set, that how do you do those small things that make massive difference? And that is really the argument for microloans as well. Grameen and the microloan movement has transformed so many of these small communities simply because these $25 donations make massive differences to these small businesses in remote and rural or, disadvantaged areas. And so it's just really an understanding that knowing where you put X plus effort brings X plus Y value. And so if you understand the nature of that, then that can be applied almost to anything. And that's the whole premise underneath 80-20 as well. 20% of your effort produce 80% of your outcome. Same thing.
And I think
so my talk really based on that essence.
Yeah, I love that, because in the talk you mentioned as well that there's this, like, even as you described that, like, it's, it makes a lot of sense, and you've explained it with such clarity and simplicity that I can't help but sit here and go, duh. But I'm aware that that's you speaking it in really simplistic terms, like really breaking it down, and that's a skill in itself. And I kind of want to sort of address that, like the fact that simplicity is such a big part of your walk, of your message that you consistently carry. And just, it's something that I'm consistently learning as well on my own journey. And if I may share just a little bit, is one of the things I've actually been learning a lot, especially in the personal development world, is when people are overcomplicating things, they're selling me something.
Yes, exactly. Totally.
And I'm like, and I was just like, if someone's keeping it simple, like some of the, let's just look at Eckhart Tolle, one of the people that I had the blessings to be mentored by, and he's just like, the power of now. Just be here now. It just is now. And it's like, that's so infuriatingly simple.
Totally.
So where does this passion for simplicity for yourself come from?
I have an analytical brain, so I think it's got a lot to do with, there's a little bit of leverage in that. There's a little bit, some would argue there's an inherent laziness to not do more than I need to. There is a little bit of the way of Zen. There's a little bit of art of war. All these elements that you can understand the first principles. You can create extraordinary value or outcomes simply because understanding the nature of power of momentum and focus. And so it's that simplicity that gives you a lot of leverage or capacity to overcompensate for the input, and therefore create all sorts of things, all sorts of opportunities, etc.
Amazing. So one of the questions I've got for you is on momentum, because that was something that has really dropped in really deeply for me that people don't actually talk so much about, right? I think it's really undervalued. So the podcast here, The Inspired Evolution, exists as a weekly show. Every week we jump on, we have these amazing conversations with amazing individuals such as yourself, continuously inspiring my growth, my evolution, and those of the listeners. And it's just been profound for me just knowing, like, all I've done is be consistent. That's the only thing I've really done. And perhaps, there's a whole conversation around laziness, which you started, by the way. I do see myself as quite lazy as well. And I honor that as part of being again, the path to least resistance is the one that I usually follow, right? And there's a sweetness to it, but there's also, some shortcomings to that. And so having that conversation, just really momentum has been such a profound thing that, I find the conversation is not being had around it.
I think it's funny because when you often state something simply, they kind of go, is that all? As we're trained for some reason to think the complexity is the answer.
Yeah.
And if you think about first principles, none of those are complex. Yet they're all universally and infinitely effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think people don't want to think about first principles, and that mostly because it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and sometimes it's confronting. It actually goes in the face of what you've always believed. And it's that, I'm going to say denial, but resistance, probably a better word, that causes that momentum to be lost because we spend all our effort trying to break our inertia rather than all our effort optimizing around our momentum.
Yeah, which is a very subtle but profound difference, right? Instead of trying to resist the old, focusing on the new and moving your way towards that, which, yeah. And so in that space, I'd like to segue into, as the curator, as you call it, of TEDx Melbourne, there's these incredible themes. Like the last one was rebels, revolutionaries, and us, right? So a very amazing time to sort of come up with a conversation around this when, there is such a call to, I guess, the way I see it is entrepreneurial, social entrepreneurs making a rise and, environmental activists having a voice and, all these movements with climate change and all this sort of stuff. And there's so many spaces, whether it's business, whether it's the environment, whether it's, personal development, there's all these people coming in and like you can feel this revolution kind of at its core. How does one such as yourself go about, like coming up with the idea of, okay, this is going to be the theme and this is what we're going to curate talks around?
Yeah. So it's a combination of things. We take the profiles and the feedback we get from our community and we quantify the sentiment, momentum, and scale. Mm-hmm. And then we... Mm-hmm. Yeah. I should write that down. I never thought about it in those 3 words, but that's exactly what I mean. And then we take an observation of kind of the global zeitgeist, what's being searched, what's being trending, whatnot, and then we find the intersection.
Right.
And so typically it's a really, really good predictor of what will trend and when it will peak in its trend curve. By watching those curves, we can work out how many people are most likely to be interested in an event if we run it at a certain time.
Right.
And that then becomes our date and our topic. So it's part art and part science, part observation, part of predictive, sort of semi-predictive elements. And that's kind of where we find our sweet spot.
I love that. It's very what I'd expect of something at the nexus of art and science, such as TED and the space that you're holding there. I think that's really awesome. So I want to also ask a question in regards to, like, you've seen a lot of people talk and present by this stage. I'm just going to go at a guess and say maybe it's more than hundreds. And some have probably been better than others. And so what does it like, is there any, I guess I'm fishing for advice, but I guess what I'm asking is what sort of helps some people stand out against others in terms of when it comes to public speaking and the art of speaking?
Yeah. So there's 2 parts to that. There's the purpose of the message in the first place. Now, that means different things to different people. Like, for instance, some people love the fact that sustainability is on the agenda.
Yeah.
Some people are over the fact that sustainability is on the agenda. Greta Thunberg is a classic example of that, where people are going, oh, enough of her. And there are people going, no, there needs to be more of her. It's like same case, same discussion, right? So there's a function of that. And then that's kind of like a bell curve type thing. And then the other part of that is around the law of averages, which is, when I see lots of talks, is that standard? Is that talk, first of all, something that everyone's talking about, no one's talking about, or someone that's talking about it but in a unique way? And to answer your question, it's that third one I'm looking for. And so the way I like to summarize that is it's got to be remarkable outside of your industry or area of expertise.
Right.
Because if it's not remarkable outside of that domain, then it's clever people having clever conversations with people who already agree with them.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Then we get this kind of community bubbles.
Yeah, totally. And you're in the echo chamber. You're consistently bouncing around in that echo chamber, which is so easily facilitated through the work of social media as well in the current day and age we live in.
Yeah.
But that's a great way of personally just reflecting that back to you. That I think that's fantastic, because it does show that this piece of content or this piece of work can actually impact those outside of those that are already adopting it. It is at the edge, it is innovative, and it is also impactful because it is being adopted.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it.
I love that. One of the things you're a massive advocate for is that the position and direction of an idea is equally as important as the idea itself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of leads into what we were talking about there. And the way I read that is, context as well as content, is something that I've, been consistently in awe of, especially through this process of podcasting. Like I can have a conversation with anyone in regards to, helping speakers, speaker notes and that sort of stuff that you'll work with, Speakers Australia, and then obviously, the curation of TEDx. Your insights are just that much more valuable because they hold the weight of, the work you've been doing, and then comes all the work you've been exposed to support that work that we have the conversation around. But tell us more by, that positioning and how it all fits in and how it's so important.
Yeah. So position and direction is really around, the example I often give is, if you have a great idea, it's not any help to anyone if it doesn't create attention and a disproportionate amount of attention. And so if you think about great brands, they always do those two things. You've got Tesla and Elon Musk and his tweets, or you've got Richard Branson and his PR stunts.
Yeah.
So it's how do you have that strong position and how do you create the disproportionate amount of attention? And so once you know that you need to do that, the other factor other two factors that influence that is the momentum and the timing. So if you're starting from zero and trying to move fast, it takes a lot of energy to do that. Whereas if it's already moving, it's just a optimize and a tweak to continue it in that direction. And that's just physics.
Right.
So it's the momentum then becomes, well, if it's already moving, it's easy to keep moving. And the timing is, is that timing at the beginning of that start or when it's already at velocity? And if you come in at the right time, determines how much further you can take it. Right.
That's fascinating.
So, yeah. And so even great change in history, women getting the vote, lots and lots of effort at the beginning, 100 years before they actually got there.
Yeah.
But it was the initial seeding of the idea, and that as you mentioned, that weekly, you do the weekly webinar. It's that weekly thing that creates the momentum. And then eventually then you hit this kind of escalation or this, tipping point where it kind of becomes self-evident that the opportunities lie.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's like a formula. It's like a formula to understand where you're standing on those shoulders of those giants almost as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. So one of the things, Jon, that's coming forward for me at the moment is you, as you said, are quite analytical, and you've created this life for yourself where, you, I would argue, managed to do what you love, which is having an impact. And, but your background is in engineering. So you're speaking, having an impact, but your background is in engineering. You've engineered a life for yourself, which, is something that you enjoy. Tell us why that was important to you. Tell us a little bit about how that came to be. And is there like a philosophical sort of understanding behind that? Yeah.
Great question. Yes. Short answer is yes. Did I consciously engineer it? Not always. But what I did know was if it didn't light me up, it was very hard to stay with it. It's self-evident, right?
It's so simple, but it's so easy to ignore, Jon.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's always been part of my kind of sense of. And so, when I quit the corporate world, it was basically I realized I didn't want to do that anymore. And 2 weeks later, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to do something else. So that's kind of always been part of my driver. That's probably the impetus of that. The engineering part was, how do you change rapidly? And arguably, that's the real question. And so that movement of change is a function of momentum, again, and timing, again. But to get to my perfect world that I kind of would argue I'm in at the moment, it was really a function of eliminating things I absolutely couldn't afford to keep doing. And some of those projects took 10 years to come off.
Right.
Because I had so much momentum underneath them that to just lose that momentum and give it away would be almost folly.
Jon, that's profound. That's profound, because most people look at it when we have conversations around purpose and following it. It's like, try more things, try new things, find your calling, find what's working. And yes, there's a space for that. But the conversation we've just instigated is actually, what's continuously happening that's taking up the bandwidth that's stopping you, inhibiting you from doing what it is that actually that is what it is that you love doing.
Yeah. And I still do those try new things, but it's now, for instance, 20% of my time consumption rather than 80% of my time consumption.
Yeah.
I got distracted by a lot of bright, shiny things for like 6-7 years. Especially in the personal development space, I spent so much money. If someone asked me how much I'd spend, they'd probably have a heart attack. I just tried everything.
Yeah.
And then realized I was getting pulled 1,000 different directions and not achieving anything in any one place.
Yeah. Which is a very important point to bring home in the personal development space as well. I think a lot of people, and it's interesting because you got to kind of go down the rabbit hole to realize, oh, whoops, like this person's saying let go and this person's saying stay focused. And it's like, wait, do I let go or do I stay focused? And it's like, oh, wait, it's all relevant to the context of where I'm at. It's like, it's like, oh, wait, I'm going to figure this out for myself. No one can really actually tell me where to go. It's like,
this is one of my challenges with a lot of advice is it's advice in a vacuum. It's not contextual to the individual. If you say, drop what you're doing and do something radical, yes, you need to do that. And you need to evaluate how that's going to impact your life holistically to work out where the momentum's lost. Because if you do, you have to pick that up. And what are you going to do about that when you adopt this new practice?
Absolutely.
And I don't think anyone thinks of it that way. I think they just kind of go, well, this course said I'm going to do that, or this guru said that, and then off they go and then realize, hang on, I'm off there somewhere and I've lost all this momentum. Oh, that doesn't work. And it's not that it didn't work. It was the wrong timing and the wrong momentum for that initiative in your life, your personal situation.
Perfect. I love that. Makes so much sense. All these pennies are just dropping in. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jon. That's brilliant. And so in terms of those, perhaps that in that 20% of those shiny new things, are there some interests that you're currently cultivating that, that you'd like to share with us?
Things that were in my domain and have an interesting edge. So I've been doing a lot. For instance, 3 years ago, I did a lot of youth and youth at risk programs, mostly sponsored by government, that one day they decided they wouldn't fund and they dropped off dramatically. And I had to kind of adapt to that.
Right.
But in more recent times, there is opportunities there. So I'm stepping much more aggressively into that space again. In that gap, I still did it, but it wasn't at the scale or momentum or level, simply because the interest and the momentum underneath it wasn't there. Because it's picked up, it's a good time to get back into it.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I'm really picking up and really focusing on, youth at risk again. I'm doing something completely new at the moment, is around women rights, women in tech, all these kind of areas. And I have been doing that for at least since 2012. TEDx Melbourne ran one of the first women's only events that I was aware of in 2012. And at the time, it became bigger than the TEDx Melbourne event itself. And I also knew I couldn't run 2 events. Because I'm volunteer, by the way. Yeah. So, doubling my effort wasn't, when it was already consuming 4 days a week, was not an option. 8 days a week, not an option.
But you're an entrepreneur, goddamn. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right.
Surely there's 14 days to a week, is there not? This is what he was saying about taking things out of the bandwidth. Yeah.
So it was like, that became not a reality. So, what I'm now doing is stepping back. And the other reason I didn't step into that is I didn't feel I was a representative sample of women in anything. But people just said, no, we still like what you say and we still what you want to do. So it gave me the confidence to step back in. And since I've done that, that's kind of like really going somewhere. So for me, is it important? Is it deeply satisfying? And isn't the domain of my expertise then become the decision criteria by which I need or want to engage if it is going to be my 80% capacity efforts. So that then became, okay, I can make that work. I can do that with the existing momentum, and I can achieve a good amount of impact because I've already got the momentum. Then I want to do that. And so it's about taking that 20% and how do I make it the 80% by measuring on those criteria.
I love that. I love that, because it's even the 20% that you're going to invest your time and energy into. You're looking at how is that going to impact the 80%. And so you're getting the greatest leverage out of that 20%. That's amazing, amazing way to look at it. And I love the words around important, satisfying, and you've got the expertise in that space so that you're actually doubling down on your strengths. And one thing that's really, look, this is going to be somewhat esoteric. I don't really know how else to pin this down as a question, but what's really sitting really poignantly for me at the moment is, Jon, you're the guy, that helps people find their voice, do the speaking, right? And so speaking is a big part of your, I'm just going to call it your medicine, right? But in that, then you're standing behind things, right? Such as youth, diversity, women's rights. And again, this is where the esoteric part of me comes into it. It's like you're sort of holding down that awareness that actually if you do find your voice, you now have a responsibility to channel it in a direction that is meaningful, important. It will be spiritually satisfying. And if you have the expertise in it, that's kind of what you've got to go follow. I do want to just take my hat off to it for a second, but also just sort of flag it and also get your insights in that.
Thank you. Look, and if you kind of boil it down, I think we have the moral responsibility to be the best person we can and to express that in every way that we can, because we're undermining our potential. And if we're undermining our potential, then we're undermining our opportunities. And if we're undermining opportunities, we're undermining my momentum again. So how would you not do that?
I love the way you broke that down. It makes a lot of sense when you say it that way. And so that conclusion is very easy to derive from the formula. Yeah.
So again, it just becomes very simple at that point. And it's that simplicity that creates the leverage.
Amazing. And so what else is the focus of, outside of speaking, when you're doubling down and you're working with these women's rights and women's rights in tech and you're doing work with youth, is it trying to invest your time and energy into helping people find their way, or what's going on in that space that is inspiring?
So in that space, it's primarily focused around how do we help people find clarity in who they are and what they want to say? How do you give them the confidence to articulate that? And then what structures would they need underneath that to do it consistently?
So you're activating leaders and helping people find their voice in that space.
Yeah, exactly.
So they can continue to have that ripple effect that you talked about.
Exactly.
Sorry, I'm joining all the dots here.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up my primary driver, which is to empower people to reach their potential and encourage them to do the same for others, because then we have an amplification effect.
Right.
And a lot of people focus on being their best and doing their best, but then that only affects their own personal domain. And I don't think that our value to the community and the way we get rewarded is by self-serving attitudes and values. The only way humanity and community and culture and business and everything else that we believe is important to us can really grow and amplify is we're constantly investing in that bigger picture.
Jon,
you can say the same for finance.
Can I ask you a question? And this may be a bit weird to ask this question, but how did you get there in terms of learning that in order for me to help, like my empowerment is to empower others, right? there would have been a certain amount of work you would have done on yourself to empower yourself, to find yourself, find your calling, find your mission, find your work, find your 80% that you want to double down on, invest in your momentum, strategically time that and get there. But then at some point realizing that actually, my wagon is hitched to the wagon of all of those that, is going to go out and create the ripple effect. Kind of like, I don't see that happening overnight. It's like me waking up and going, oh, yep, my mission is to help everybody else activate. It's like a... Yeah, can you talk about that?
Sure. So, look, it's a good point. So if we don't feed ourselves, so to speak, then there's no way we can ever help anyone else. So in a way, there is a conscious selfishness, but it's for a purpose. And it's only initially for survival, and then it's for expansion. But I mean, the best analogy I can come to that is an analogy I was given relatively recently around a tomato plant. If I just got a tomato and put it on the desk, it will wither away into nothing. Nothing happens from it. If I take that tomato and take the seeds and put it in the ground, I'll get a tomato plant. I know that sounds obvious. I can choose to eat all the tomatoes, in which case I have nothing next year. I can choose to eat, say half the tomatoes and plant half the tomatoes and get an abundance of tomatoes. There's only a point I can only eat so many tomatoes. Where I just took half that crop and planted it, half that crop planted it, half that crop and planted it, I'll end up with infinite tomatoes. Right?
Yeah.
And then you can't not add value, first of all, you can only eat so many tomatoes, but you can't not add value by just giving it away. And not literally, but what's the value of that giving? Whether it's a tomato or your time or your effort or investing you can't stop a tomato being a tomato, and you can't stop a tomato amplifying and multiplying. That's a law of nature. And we're a seed of potentials just like the tomato. And so how do you take what you have, be the best you can, be the most flourishing thing that you can be, in order that you have excess for other things to amplify? And so then it extends beyond me to, well, how do I give other people tomatoes and teach them how to share tomatoes? But in this case, it's advice or support or, anything else. The value you create is by investing in yourself. But there's a point where the excess then you can't consume. By default, you not have to give it away, but
the only logical next
there's also no value in keeping it either, right? Like if I had infinite tomatoes, where the hell am I going to put them? So why not create value out of that and encourage and let that become the platform or conversation by which more things can happen? So I don't know if when you say I've got there, I would argue that I've not got there. But how do we continue to nurture that possibility of that infiniteness? And so it then becomes a law of nature, then becomes the law of of our being, then becomes the law of humanity, because we're not really separate.
Yeah, I love that conversation. And thank you so much for sharing that. I knew it was only a matter of time when we was going to start talking about this economy of ecosystem of possibility and the community amplifier that you believe in, which, is it. I can see a romance brewing for myself in the ideology. For me, it's all about connecting people and ideas. That's my whole thing. And just that idea in itself is profound. And I love the way you described it just then with the tomato metaphor. I'm actually surprised you said you got that from somewhere. It sounded like completely your own, because it just spoke to what you shared in terms of the ecosystem of possibility and the community amplifier. Is there anything else you want to share with us in regards to that? Well, I think that was it
just occurred to me that in a separate video by a guy called Alan Watts, did a video about the planet. A tomato plant has tomatoes and a planet has people. So when a tomato plant grows, it grows tomatoes, but when an earth has people, it peoples. And so he has this really interesting sort of analogy, almost the same conversation about that. So I would maybe go look at some of the Alan Watts videos where Trey Parker, the guy that does South Park, animated some of his works.
Ah,
and so all of those are worth watching.
Yeah,
all of them are worth watching, but one is the one about the tomato.
I love that. Alan Watts is by far the philosopher that lives most in my head rent free. It's just incredible work of just the entertainment with which he brings Zen philosophy to the West is just unparalleled in my humble opinion. So on that note, Jon, are there people that inspire you on your path at the moment?
Well, it's somewhat, I don't know. I'm always exploring because I'm always discovering clever people doing clever things. And even the right message at the wrong time doesn't necessarily get grounding, But in terms of people who I continually seem to come back to on maybe regular or not so regular timescales, I really enjoy a lot of Tony Robbins interviews. I find them fascinating about how he unpacks people. I just discovered literally yesterday or the day before yesterday a guy called somebody Parrish. Can't remember his name. I'll give it to you for the show notes. Can't remember off the top of my head.
Oh, good.
Bob Proctor's been a big influence of mine. Big one. They're the ones that kind of come to mind at the moment.
Awesome.
But I'm always exploring. I probably have, just podcasts alone, I've got 130 hours of want to listen on top of I've actually downloaded.
On top of your reading list.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I tend to explore concepts rather than people. And the reason for that these days is because it's the diversity of opinion on a single concept that I feel I can generate the most understanding and value, because it's the unique perspectives that let me go, I agree with that, or I don't see that. Why am I not seeing it the same way? Or what is this angle that I've not heard of before on the same concept that allows me to explore that concept from lots of different angles that I wouldn't necessarily see if I just came in. So these days I tend to explore concepts rather than people. But in the beginning, it was lots of individuals.
Yep. I think that's really profound, because what you're also sharing is basically the formula somewhat to creativity, right? There's the way Steve Jobs would put it, in terms of it's all about just joining the dots, and no two people can put the dots the same way because they're of a very different makeup. Yeah.
Exactly.
Man, time flies when you're having fun, Jon. I'm just conscious of the fact that I've had you here, and I feel like I could just talk to you for. There's definitely a gift here in your ability to speak, to share, to create ideas, to create momentum around them, and it's really been it's been a real treat for me personally just to take some time to sit here and really I understand the importance of, having the right idea, but also the amount of energy that goes into getting an idea traction, and also the momentum that it needs, and also the timing that it needs, right? And also creating the conversation around creating bandwidth for, things that are in your life that are already having momentum, and perhaps they need to fizzle down in order for you to have the momentum around the things that you really want to have. Those have been some really, really key takeaways. And obviously having you here and the conversation around simplicity and just instilling that into your life, I think it may be very easy for the listener to perhaps just overlook how structured and how simple all the little bits and pieces that you put together and articulated, and how straightforward they really are. But then I can see just through your experience how much of a volume of work it takes to actually build that into crafting that simplicity is actually a whole discipline in itself. So thank you so much for taking the time, the energy, and the presence to share that with us here today. And also all the work you put into yourself to be able to inform this wonderful, yummy conversation that we've had. Before we dive out, is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
No, not really. I just, stay the path. Believe when you see something and it lights you up that is the right way. And, be willing in order to have something new, you've got to give up something as well. I think that's a really important part of that.
I love that. And so for those that want to tune in to Jon, the best place and the best way to do that would be?
Probably LinkedIn. Yeah. So I would really, 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 really like people to add a little comment if they are going to connect with me on LinkedIn. The main reason is that there's people who just basically join with everyone, which is fine, but I like to have meaningful conversations and purposeful connections. And you can't do that if you just kind of open up to everything. So, more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, but make sure you put a comment so that I understand the nature of the interaction.
Yeah, send a little one-sentence summary, perhaps, of just saying, I heard you on the Inspired Evolution podcast and this really spoke to me. Wonderful to connect with you. Yeah, that'd be beautiful. That'd be beautiful.
Yeah.
Jon, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and all the work that you do, inspiring all of us to continue speaking, finding our voices, sharing our messages, and activating leaders, and leading by example in terms of actually using our voices to create the impact in the world that we wish to see.
Awesome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Love of the Inspired Evolution and sharing the Love of the Inspired Evolution. If you feel like this content has supported you or may support anyone else that you know may resonate with the content of it, please share away and share the love around. Thank you guys so much. And to stay up to date on whatever's coming out with the Inspired Evolution, please subscribe. There's all these links in the bio for you to tune into the episodes and all these different platforms, just so the message can get to you and your loved ones. Thank you so much for all your love and support. Stay inspired to evolve.